I promise at some point we will stop having Super Famicom episodes of Nihon no Konyu Henshokai. But this is not that time. Nor will it be time in 3 weeks when I have to do episode 9, 2 or 3 weeks, whatever it is. But anyway, let's talk about more Super Famicom games. I have so many Super Famicom games. They're all up there at the top. I know you see them every episode. But anyway, let's dive right into it. At the end of the last Super Famicom episode, I believe we talked about Pinocchio. Big Pinocchio fan, big Disney fan. And the next game, I also thought it was Disney, but it is not Disney, and that is Hook. So this is a July 1992 2D side-scroller developed by Ukiyo-e and published by Epic/Sony Records based on the 1991 film that is not at all related to Disney's Peter Pan. But I thought it was. This is Ukiyo-e's first game, but they have some interesting games on their ledger, including Tarot Mystery, 3 Metal Slug games, and 2 King of Fighters games. So, like, there's some stuff there. The game would come to North America 3 months later in October 1992, even though this game does not at all look like a Japanese game of any sort. But I could barely tell you anything about Disney's Peter Pan, and I can barely tell you anything about this movie. I think I could be so wrong, but I think Robin Williams is in this movie, but whatever the case is, you play as this version of Peter Pan trying to rescue his children. My notes say his children. I don't know if it's like the typical you're saving kids or Peter Pan has children in this. I don't remember. It's okay. But the game was received actually pretty fairly well. If not amazingly, but there was a Genesis version, a Game Gear version, and a Sega CD version, all that came after this one. So, like, that's cool, I guess. I don't know. Hook making some waves in video game media. So moving on, there is a type of game that is way more popular in Japan to the point that they get yearly entries and simplified / cartoony versions for kids. It's a sport, and do you have any guesses what it is? It's horse racing, obviously. So this is Battle Jockey, which is a December 1994 horse racing game developed by Nova Games and published by Virgin Interactive, with Nova Games most notably, to me at least, doing a Shonen Ashibi game. So that's kind of cool. But if Mario Kart was a horse racing game, this would pretty much be it. There are 3 modes. The first mode is a single-player mode where you have to make sure you don't push your horse too hard, or else stuff goes wrong. A 4-player mode where you race with power-ups, so like that's Mario Kart. And there's also, despite the fact this game looks very cartoony, there is a gambling mode where you put your money down and watch CPUs play out the race. So that's basically a crapshoot. But like, I don't know. That seems weird for a game that looks like it could be for kids. Americans take horse racing like kind of seriously when money is involved, but apparently the whole hobby is like way more popular over there, which, if it weren't for me seeing these games in Japanese everywhere, I wouldn't even know that Japan had horses. I don't know why I think that, but this is odd, and there's so many of these games out there. So, Battle Jockey. And from one uncommon sport to the next, we have Ski Paradise with Snowboard. What a lovely title. Let's get into some of the other titles. But this is a April 1994 skiing and snowboarding game, unsurprisingly, developed by Loriciels. It's French. I probably pronounced that wrong. And published by both Mindscape and Loriciels at the same time in Europe. So the game was initially known as Val d'Isère Championship, but I think the regular English release was published by Mindscape in Europe, and the French release was published by Loriciels. If that makes any sense, I suppose it makes kind of sense. Like I said, Loriciels is French, and they actually have a small catalog of games going as far back as like 1983. They have plenty of sports games. They even have games for a French computer that I've never even heard before, but it's still an odd release history. So it's weird enough that it released in Europe first, but then it went to North America next as Tommy Moe's Winter Extreme Skiing and Snowboarding. That was 2 months after the French release, or the European release. But then finally in Japan, in December 1994, this game released as Ski Paradise with Snowboard, which is, like I said, that's a funny name. So 8 total months from the initial release to this one. It's published by Pack-In Video, who we've talked about a couple times. And yeah, I don't know. At least in North America, Tommy Moe was like a skier who won gold and silver medals at the 1994 Olympics. That's all he did. I think that's all his Wikipedia page says he did. But as you'd expect, it's a sports game. It's skiing and snowboarding in a variety of expected modes like competition, training, and freestyle in typical main events. And I don't know what else you want me to say about this, but I always say how weird it is when Japan gets like very American-based games. So like number one example I always say is Madden. Madden football in Japan, I think, is one of the weirdest things ever, and I kind of feel the same way about this. Does it snow in Japan? I'm being dead serious. I didn't think horses existed in Japan. I don't think it snows in Japan, so, like, what are the games in this episode I picked? I randomly chose some very weird ones. The next one's also very weird, but I will say it's at least quite interesting, and this is Wonder Project J Kakai no Shonen Pino. So this is a December 1994 life sim developed by Almanac Corp and published by Enix, of course, future Square Enix. And Almanac has a whopping 8 games on their GameFAQs page, including a random Super Famicom game that we talked about years ago at this point. But this game has a sequel, and it wasn't even published and developed by the same people. So I thought this was going to be super obscure, but it surprisingly had a full Wikipedia page, despite it being completely stuck in Japan. So it's also, again, funny that we talked about Pinocchio at the end of the last Super Famicom episode, but this game is almost a little Pinocchio-inspired, even if it's the original story and not necessarily the Disney movie. So you play as Dr. Geppetto. Hat tip to Geppetto's dad in a Pinocchio. No, was it Pinocchio's dad Geppetto in Pinocchio? But anyway, Dr. Geppetto created the robot Pinocchio, okay, who himself has a very fairy companion named Tinker. Pinocchio also has a companion named Jiminy Cricket. Tinker is really close to Tinkerbell, except Tinkerbell was in Peter Pan, and Tinker is a very technical term, and you created a robot named Pino. This is all great. I don't know. The goal of the game is literally to train Pino to be a real boy via point-and-click adventuring in an almost RPG-like fashion, which is maybe not super surprising for a game published by Enix. I don't know, but regardless, for a game that seems funny and weird, it received and sold extremely well, making it the 33rd best-selling game on the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo combined, placing ahead of The Lion King, NBA Jam, Mega Man X, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. So, like, that's actually kind of crazy. I don't know why. There's probably some history I'm missing here, but, like, that's really cool. Again, the game had a Japan-only sequel called Wonder Project J2 in 1996, where you basically run the whole concept back, but with a female robot and a completely different company developing it, so there's that. But overall, this is a very neat piece of Super Nintendo history, and we are just going to continue the weird games in this episode with the final one, and I bought it because it sounded interesting, and it did not disappoint. This is Super Wrestle Angels, which is a December 1994 all-female wrestling game developed by Great and published by Imagineer. The studio Great has a pretty much all Japanese exclusive library, but they are responsible for the first few Wrestle Angels games, the first of which was released on Japanese home computers in February 1992, so like almost 3 full years before this came out. So this specific game, according to Moby Games, is a scaled-down version of Wrestle Angels 3, which initially released on Japanese home computers, but in October 1993, so a little over a year from home computer release to this one. But again, this just seems like a simplified version of that PC game, Wrestle Angels 3. I had no idea that this series was like fleshed out in the slightest, but it's literally a female wrestling game with emphasis on them being pretty girls wrestling. Not really surprising when you consider the stuff that comes out of Japan, but what is surprising, in addition to the combat-based gameplay, there's also a wrestling career sim. Not that different from like a general manager mode in modern sports games. So this wasn't unique. Wrestling had games for like almost 10 years at this point, but there's nothing about this game that seems like First thing that would come to mind. I don't know. So for one reason or another, these games were primarily on Japanese home computers, but this was the first home console port. And there would end up being a PC Engine CD game in 1995, another, I'm pretty sure, Super Famicom game in 1996, and then 2 PS2 games in 2006 and 2008, including Wrestle Angels Survivor. This is a PS2 game, but this is a Super Famicom episode. This entire episode is just cursed. This isn't even really a game I would show off, but it goes along with the theme. So I actually bought this in a completely separate binge from when I got that other Super Wrestle Angels game, and it wasn't until I was researching that I was like, wait a second, Wrestle Angels, how unlikely is it that these are in the same series? They were in the same series. So this game was released in August 2006, being developed and published by Success, the same studio behind High School Terror Story, if you happen to remember from the Sega arc way early in 2025. But it's in the same series. So one thing I did forget to mention about Super Wrestle Angels is that there is a card battling element to the game, almost more card battling than there is actual wrestling. But the GameFAQs page for Super Wrestle Angels, the Super Famicom game, didn't really put a lot of emphasis on that, but this is definitely card-based battling. GameFAQs even says for this specific game, it is turn-based card battling strategy. So I have to listen to what GameFAQs says. And that's literally not a joke. Not a single other site had info about this game, so I had to watch a YouTube gameplay of it. And it's definitely card battling way more than I expected. I don't know why I expected actual wrestling, since I'm not a wrestling fan at all, but maybe that's how Japan just worked in all-female wrestling into a genre, but you just made it card battling? I don't know. This episode was just super weird. Anyway, that's all I got for this episode, for as totally bizarre as some of these releases were. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything I missed about these games, anything I got wrong, please correct me. I would love to continue learning about these games as much as I have hopefully taught you something. So, with that said, bye!